Hey, Kevin Inouye here again from Fight Designer LLC, and I want to talk today a little bit about sword construction, particularly involving aluminum sword props. Now, aluminum presents some interesting challenges with sword construction because the way that we would traditionally construct a sword usually involves either a peened tang or a threaded tang. Now, the tang is the part that goes through the handle here. This would be an example of a threaded tang, and this is the most common, certainly in modern production swords, and was certainly an option in some medieval swords. You have examples of that. Modern swords, they'll also sometimes use a tang nut, which was historically found more on later era swords, but where there's a cap that kind of screws in from the back end and holds that. And that can be nice, especially for non-symmetrical pommels. So the nice thing about threaded pommels is you can screw them on and off easily. If you need to do some maintenance, you can also tighten them easily. So if your sword starts going clack instead of clang, you tighten up the hilt a bit and it'll ring much better. I have previous videos about that from ages ago. But with aluminum swords, they do tend to loosen up a little bit faster because it's a softer metal. And so that can be an issue. And the other problem is, again, going back to it being a softer metal, threaded tangs can strip because usually our pommel is still steel because the whole point is that we want a counterweight. So some of the first aluminum swords that I got were a set of aluminum rapier and daggers, half dozen of those from David Baker back in mid-2000s, something like that. And I used them for free rent fairs and rented them out for a few things. But I found that inevitably over time, the tang threads got stripped because just hand tightening them, as people noticed they were getting a little loose and they just tighten it by hand, and it would be enough to rip the threads out of the aluminum. So we're gonna look at a couple of different ways that people have handled that and the implications that might have for sword maintenance and for choosing your swords. So this one here, this is Rogue Steel. Rogue Steel is a great sort of industry standard for stage combat swords. And they're fairly standardized between their steel and their aluminum in terms of the hilts and the handles and the pommels, so you can swap them all out. And the way that they get away with that is this larger than standard tang. So this is a thicker bolt than you would normally find on most steel swords. And I don't remember them having that before they started carrying aluminum, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I would guess that this is something that they changed as sort of their new standard once they started selling aluminum versions just as commonly as steel versions. So that's one option that can certainly help, is just beefing things up. Note that those pommels are also threaded fairly deeply, so there's a more real estate there to work with. When it's a smaller thing like just a nut on the end, if I tried to just tighten this enough to tighten up the whole assembly on an aluminum bolt there, that would just strip, which is why this is not an aluminum bolt. So this is another thing that you sometimes see, is the aluminum has a steel bolt mounted in it. And so in this case, it's drilled through and threaded. And so that steel goes fairly deep into this. So that, again, gives you a fair amount of aluminum. So this is unlikely to pull out or strip. And then the nut itself is going onto a steel bolt, so that's going to be fairly secure. This is one that I bought the blade. I can't remember where this one came from, and hilted up myself with some scrap aluminum I was able to find, and wood and leather. So that is one option, is to mount a steel bolt, and that's a fairly common option that you see. Now that last one was fairly well done. This one is a little bit more quick and dirty. This was, I do remember where this blade came from. This one was a spare blade stock from Shanghai Knights, the sequel to Shanghai Noon. And in this case, you can see they actually riveted steel to the tang and kind of did a weird grind thing to sort of level it off. So there's riveted steel welded to a tang and riveted to the aluminum. So it's an interesting sort of workaround, but it does the job. And this was also a thicker than normal tang. It's not entirely standardized what size bolt should be in the bottom of your sword. But again, some of these are for movies and some of these are for live theater. Live theater, like Rogue Steel caters a lot to, you care about sound. You want it to be able to tighten up enough that it'll ring half decently and not just go clack, clack. Blades that are designed for movies, doesn't matter because they're gonna fold it in anyway. Another example of a blade designed for movies. This was spare blades from Prince of Persia: Sands of Time that I hilted these up cheap to be able to use for kids' classes and productions and things where you want super, super light. And so these blades were so light that I was able to use aluminum furniture on them, which makes it easier to keep the weight down for shipping and everything else. It does mean everything is a little bit soft. But what I did to attach these, this is a PVC core grip here, but these have a rivet here. So while that might get a little bit loose over time, it's never gonna fall off because it is riveted on there. Some of them I use steel rivets, some of them I use brass, whatever. Anyway, but rivets are obviously an option. Here's another one that I did, and this one was with a blade blank from Rogue Steel. But again, riveted slab construction. And the guard and pommel were also, the outlines were part of the custom order I did with Rogue Steel. And so then I did 2-part. And these are also, there's a rivet here. There's 2 on each side for the eyes of those little heads. There's a rivet here, and again, 1 on each side. So again, these are pretty well riveted together. And if the rivets get loose, you can always just use a ball peen hammer and tighten those up a little bit. This is one that had an aluminum tang straight into the blade. My cheat on this was to use one of these couplers instead of a standard bolt. So again, it like triples the width of the thing that's threaded on there. And if I wanted to add another little one on the end, I could. I haven't really decided yet if I need to on this. So the more surface area you have in contact, the less likely it is to strip. So this allowed me to tighten it up decently without having to weld something else on there or worry about creating a steel bolt within that. Oh, this is another one that I finished up myself. But what a lot of movies do these days for their, especially the sort of the generic stunt battle swords or whatever, is cast rubber around an aluminum hilt for the stunt blades. And more they're also switching to bamboo and things too. But here's an example of a movie one. Actually, I think this was television. This was ABC's Once Upon a Time, I think. I got a deal on this on eBay. You know, less for the sword with the scabbard than I'd normally pay just for the blade blank from Rogue Steel. And I haven't decided yet if I'm gonna leave it like this or if I'm gonna redo it, because all of this is cast rubber. Now, what that means is it's super light and it's super safe, but I also can't use the Queons in choreography. So these are cheaper for the production company to mass produce and to make doubles from. They can do a casting of the hero sword grip, make as many rubber doubles as they want, mold it straight onto the aluminum. But all of the things that you might do in medieval swordplay where you're trapping a blade against your Queon, doing a Queon hit, any of that kind of stuff, and these are gonna break off because it's just rubber and not super strong rubber at that. It's fairly soft. So we'll see. You know, I'm not sure what use I'll have the most of for these. You know, if I have a movie that wants a quick shot with something, you know, maybe this will work, but I don't have spares because I didn't mold these myself. So that limits the utility of it as such. But it is nice and light, and you know, with a fresh finish and coat of paint, it can look pretty decent. But it is interesting to think about designing fights that do not make practical use of the Queons because they were designed to work with cast rubber hilts. And that's not something I'd thought about before because I haven't personally worked on a movie that used these yet. Most of the films that I've worked on have still used often just steel production sort of furniture with aluminum blades thrown on them. The one that I got my side card on, for example, did that. Or if it's little indie stuff, usually my own swords that I provide because I have Fight Designer LLC at my disposal. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, and the implications towards choreography are also an interesting thing to think about as a little tweak for those of us who like to do fight coordination for film and television as well as live theater and how it's different. So I'll have more to share soon with another update on the mocap diaries. I have some stuff I want to update on PewTube. I've got the 3D printer running again, so I've got more stuff there to share. What I don't always have is time and motivation, so we'll see. But if there's something you're dying to see and you're interested in, by all means, let me know. I hope this has been useful, and until next time, look good, have fun, stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and I'll see you later.